Another case where we hear Kulthum speak, and I think that we need to understand and recognize the role of people like Kulthum was when they were about to enter Medina. We hear that when Bashir goes and tells the people of Medina that you better go out of Medina because the Ahlul Bayt are coming. And we hear, especially the women folk, by the way, they went running out of Medina because they knew now that Zainab is coming back, Kulthum is coming back, Fatima Sohra, Rabah, Layla, and so on. So they all went back, and one of the most powerful speeches given at that point was Kulthum. They say that because of her and the speeches given by others too, Medina was in turmoil, literally, to the extent that even in Kufa, this is something that I read recently, that after Kulthum spoke, after Zainab spoke in Kufa, Fatima Sughra spoke. And as she was speaking, the people said, please stop. We can't take it anymore. Our hearts are inflamed. We never realized this is what will happen. You can see the effect it was having now. It says, please stop now. We can't take it anymore. This was the people of Kufa speaking as Fatima Sohra started speaking. And therefore, I think that we need to give due consideration to all these people. Because if Karbala is about the men of the Ahlul Bayt, after Karbala we're talking of the women of Ahlul Bayt. What are these certain principles apart from justice? It is the question of human rights. We talk so much these days about human rights, especially in the West. But in the West, human rights is something that was constructed in the post-Enlightenment period. If you have studied Western history, European history in particular, you get the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the deism, and so on. But the idea of human rights and the inalienable, as they say, essential, intrinsic rights of all human beings that notion comes in the past 200 years, not more than that. And the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights was actually established after the Second World War. It's that recent. What is interesting about this human rights conception in the West is that it's not only improvised by the West, but imposed on others. In other words, they come up with the idea of what is human rights, and then they impose it on others, on other countries, without taking into account cultural differences, religious differences, ethnic differences. It's as if we as Muslims coming from abroad impose our values on others. They wouldn't like it. But that's what they did too, saying, no, we agree as far as human, the basics we agree upon. But they basically came up and imposed their conception of human rights on others. And of course, as we are aware, they basically contradicted, refuted, violated those same rights whenever it suited them. I don't need to go very far to tell you the very recent example which only came up last week of how 4 American soldiers were urinating on corpses. You saw that, didn't you? Yeah. I mean, how vulgar can you get? And the people said, well, this is bad, they shouldn't have done that. But there was no outcry that I've seen in America that these people have to be brought to justice. We've all heard of Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo Bay, waterboarding, and so on. So they tend to violate their rights, their conception of rights. Rendition flights, you heard of the rendition flights? Whereby they pick somebody from wherever because they suspect he or she is a terrorist and go and torture him. And then they talk of human rights. So, Islamically, the question of human rights is very different because we believe that human rights cannot be imposed from the outside. It's something which is intrinsic, which comes from within you. Rights are those which are given by God to all human beings. The Islamic conception of human rights can be seen in the concept of fitra. You've all heard of the TV program 2020? But this is 30-30, not easy to forget. Chapter 30, verse 30 is the verse of fitra. وَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ. Set your face, the Quran is telling us, to the upright way, upright religion. وَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. This is the disposition, this is the quality, the trait of Allah. Fitra, not any fitra, the fitra of God. فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا, with which God has created human beings. In other words, there is a common element that all human beings share, whether they are Jews, Christians, Muslims, is immaterial, which has been imposed, which has been ingrained, we better word, by God. And there are two elements to this fitra. One is that it is universal. Universal meaning that all human beings have it. You can discard it, but you cannot deny it. You can say, I don't care about it, but it's there. It's just like our conscience. You can say, I'm going to do wrong anyway, I don't care. But it's still there. So it is universal. It's also moral. It's an ethical language. Because it tells us to distinguish between right and wrong. Many a time, take a thief, for example. God forbid, the first time he or she steals, something is going to kill him. The conscience. That what you're doing is wrong. Because there's something that is ingrained. But then, of course, he tries to halalize his act. So, well, a little bit is okay. I need it more than they do. So the second time that person steals, the conscience will bite, but not as much as the first time. And the third time, they start actually enjoying it. What has happened is that instead of the conscience killing him or her, he or she has killed the conscience. So that he doesn't bite. Because if we don't kill the conscience will kill us. We tend to do that. So there's an ethical framework. That's why, by the way, many a time, when you hear suffering, killing, whatever it may be Cambodia, maybe in Polynesian island, I as a human being must feel it. But if I don't, then I have to question my whole humanity, my whole being as a human being. And Islam expects this. Therefore, wherever the Quran talks of oppression, that you must fight oppression, it never says that you must fight those who are oppressing Muslims. It doesn't mention the religion of the oppressed. Because oppression is wrong, is wrong, is wrong. Whoever is oppressing is wrong, whoever is being oppressed should be helped. So it doesn't say that you must help only those who are Muslims and are being oppressed. It says oppressed is wrong. And secondly, you will notice the universal impact, the ethical tenor of this, is that the Quran does not define certain terms, ethical terms, because it assumes that as a human being you know it and you understand it. So when the Quran uses the word salih, for example, it doesn't tell us what salih means, uprightness, or dhulm, wrongdoing, because it assumes that we know it. It's something that is ingrained in all of us. I personally, I don't mind saying this, that two of my greatest heroes in recent history were Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela, simply because they fought for certain principles that we as human beings share. But they're not Muslim or Christian principles. Principles are principles, by the way. They're principles across the board. It is kind of ironic that in South Africa, when a person like Nelson Mandela goes to prison for 27 years, those who supported him and those who kind of fought against apartheid were Christians rather than Muslims. Some Muslims did, but the majority doesn't concern us, kind of stuff. And it's an ethical principle, which is an Islamic principle, by the way. The Quran goes further in this discourse of human rights, because the Quran is deeply, deeply concerned about how human beings behave. And so, not only does the Quran give us the fitrah, there are four things total that Allah or God has given to all human beings. All human beings. One is the Spirit of God. فَنَفَخَ بِهِ رُوحٍ فَنَخَرَ مِنْ رُوحٍ. That Allah has, so we said, blown the Spirit into all human beings. That's why, by the way, we have three spirits, if you like. One is what we call inspire. So, I mean, inspired. Literally, inspired means I've got the Spirit. And therefore, when somebody dies, what do we say? Expire. Expire literally means the Spirit is no longer there. It's not the date on your Kellogg's cornflakes box, you know, it's expired. Literally, expire means the Spirit has gone out. So there is the inspire. When we say I'm inspired, you tend to feel kind of a high, you feel good about something. You feel elevated spiritually. But literally, inspire means the spirit is in. Expire means the spirit is out. And in between these two spires, there's another spire. It's called aspire. We aspire to live up to what we are supposed to live up to. In other words, to be good, conscientious, ethical, moral human beings. And if we do not aspire to those principles, then we have to question our very existence, as Imam Hussain said. Most of us, well, not most of us, quite a few of us, instead of aspiring, we perspire, rather than aspire, especially when you're giving a talk like this. Seriously, so that's the first kind of spirit given to all human beings, inspiration, the Spirit of God. The second level, that's life itself, by the way. The second is that of knowledge. And knowledge is reflected in the name that the angels that God taught to Adam. The names that we taught him Adam. The names with even the angels did not know. You remember the story in the Quran, I don't want to go into details. What that tells us, according to one interpretation, there's some interpretation, is the names reflect knowledge. Because if God creates a human being without empowering that human being, then that human being cannot be held morally responsible. So, knowledge, spirit first, knowledge, then comes the moral guidance that I was talking about earlier, fitra. The fitra of right and wrong. And the fourth level is responsibility. Whatever God gives, He also expects. Inna alayna lal-huda wa lana lal-akhiratu wal-ula. Upon us, the Quran says, is to give guidance. In other words, God feels that it is essential, required, that God must give guidance. And then God says, وَعَلَيْنَا الْآخِرَةَ وَالْأُولَى. Then the beginning and the end is upon us. In other words, we will question Him. So we have four concepts there. The Spirit of God in all human beings, which symbolizes life, knowledge, the names. Then the moral guidance, which is symbolized by fitra, and the amana. Amana is the responsibility. All human beings, وَإِنَّ عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَ عَلَى السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالِ. We have given the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains. فَأَبَيْنَا أَنْ يَحْمِلْنَا. But they refused to accept it. وَحَمَلَهُ الْإِنسَانُ. But insan, human beings, took upon that responsibility. إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. But he is proven to be true, zalim, and ignorant. And that responsibility is living up, or aspiration, if you like, living up to what we are required to do. You will see that almost everything I've said now about human rights comes from the Quran. And by the way, having read all the major scriptures of the other religions, you will not find any document which is as concerned about the rights of human beings as the Quran is. You will not find, that's my challenge to you. You know, people tell me, and I think this is something we have to learn and explain to non-Muslims. We don't need to further explain to them that the Quran is a violent document. Excuse me, have you heard of this book called the Old Testament? You know the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? My students tell me the Old Testament is old, the New Testament is new. Okay, there's a more subtle explanation. The Old Testament is what we call the Hebrew Bible, what the Jews and Christians follow, and the New Testament is about the Gospels, the life of Jesus. That's in short, but it's more detailed than that. In any case, in the Old Testament, there's far more violence. Far more violence. The God of the Old Testament is a violent God that you will never ever find in the Quran. How can any prophet, the way that Moses is supposed to tell his own followers, why did you leave those Midians alive? Why did you leave the women alive? Go and kill each and every human being. Where does the Quran say go and kill each and every human being? It's in the Old Testament. That Joshua enters Jericho and he kills not only human but every living thing, every living creature. The killing in the Old Testament, killing is good, it's okay as long as the good guy is winning. That's the Old Testament. What is it? The Quran, you read, Man qatala nafsan bighayri nafsin aw fasadin fil ard fakannama qatala an-nasa jami'an. You kill one innocent soul, you've killed the whole of humanity. You save one innocent soul, you've saved the whole of humanity. That's in the Quran, by the way. You will not find it in the Hebrew Bible. You find it in the Talmud. The Talmud is a commentary. It's not the actual original Bible.